South Korea's strategy on North Korea is facing quite a bit of scrutiny as it looks ahead to a change in leadership, raising uncertainty about the future course of cross-border relations. We have more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective. It's Tuesday, April 15th here in Seoul, and I'm Min Sun-hee. As South Korea prepares for an early presidential election, it also faces, as some media outlets point out, critical choices about its future policy on North Korea. For more on this reality and on the current efforts to ease tensions here on the Korean peninsula, I have Ruy Valdes, a correspondent for Spanish news agency EFE Spain. Ruy, welcome back.
Nice to be here, Tony.
I also have Professor Ban Kil Joo at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy live on the line. Professor Ban, as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hello, good to be with you.
Right, Ruy, we will start here in the studio. And before we explore the options to diffuse tensions here on the Korean peninsula, let's start with North Korea's celebration of the birthday of its late founder, which is today, April 15th. What are some of the related events to celebrate this day up across the border?
Yes, there was several events. Just a little thing, the emphasis seemed to be on Kim Jong-un instead of Kim Il-sung, but well, I will elaborate a little bit later. Within the events, there was a Spring Festival that is celebrated yearly. There was a Russian youth delegation that visited. Some civil groups sent flowers as commemoration, but really a large, important event hasn't been reported, but we have to remember that usually Kim Jong-un activities are reported until the next day. So probably tomorrow we will know more about this, but well, we could say that the regular events were celebrated. Also, it's worth to mention that a little bit in the beginning of April, there was the Pyongyang International Marathon, which is linked to the celebrations of April because of Kim Il-sung's birthday. And in this marathon, there was participation of people from more than 45 countries, which was interesting because it's one of these few times North Korea opened its doors to foreigners. And there's a little detail about the name of the International Marathon, which is that they took out the birthplace or claimed birthplace of Kim Il-sung from the name. And why is this important? Because it seems that gradually the focus on Kim Il-sung is decreasing to, they say experts, that is to consolidate the standalone authority of Kim Jong-un, which means that people focus more on his achievements, of his work, and it starts like putting in a more secondary place his predecessors. And before this day, the birthday of Kim Il-sung was called the Day of the Sun. Last year, they changed the name to 4/15. The Ministry of Unification of South Korea was saying that on last April, this term name of Day of the Sun was only used once. But this time, in the same period, it has been just used again 6 times, which means they might have regretted to be so drastic about this decision because people are so used to call it Day of the Sun, but it's still relatively a low number of repetitions where they quote this name. So their belief or interpretation is that now they will little by little start decreasing the use of Day of the Sun to then substitute to 4/15. All of this related to this new approach of Kim Jong-un to consolidate this standalone authority.
Right, 4/15 referring to, of course, April 15th, which is the birthday of the late founder Kim Il-sung.
Right.
Professor Ban, here in South Korea, Unification Minister Kim Young-ho, meanwhile, was in Japan last week to reaffirm commitment to North Korea's denuclearization. What are your thoughts on the timing of this particular diplomatic call, especially ahead of South Korea's early presidential election?
Well, we need to see beyond bilateral diplomatic communication between South Korea and Japan about the denuclearization of North Korea. To be more precise, this diplomatic call had 3 expected utilities in general. In particular, it targeted 3 different actors. First of all, I would say that it was directly aimed at North Korea. The diplomatic call, which is ahead of an early presidential election, was aimed at preventing North Korea from miscalculation by showing that the ROC government is well functional, including military and diplomatic preparedness. Second, it targets Japan. To be more specific, it could create a diplomatic synergy that the revived ROC-Japan diplomacy continues to go on without a hitch. As you are well aware, the shuttle diplomacy between South Korea and Japan was normalized, and some are worried about what will happen in this bilateral relationship in this domestic situation. So in this latest diplomatic call served as a sign to make the bilateral relationship still stable. Finally, this message has something to do with trilateral architecture. This diplomatic call is helpful for making trilateral relationship between South Korea, the United States, and Japan continue to go, although the Trump administration has not published its national security strategy yet. Meanwhile, the second Trump administration reaffirmed the denuclearization of North Korea. So it would be synergic for surviving a trilateral architecture if the other two countries, South Korea and Japan, reaffirm their willingness of the denuclearization of North Korea in a bilateral platform, because it turns out to show common threat perceptions between the three countries. So all in all, this diplomatic call was meaningful and timely in terms of security, bilateral diplomacy, and trilateral security cooperation between the three countries.
Right. Professor Ban, while the three countries, South Korea, Japan and the US, call for North Korea's denuclearization, last week North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister Kim Yo-jong, she called the denuclearization mission a daydream, declaring that Pyongyang's nuclear status is permanent. How do you interpret her words?
To be honest with you, I would say that the daydream discourse was initiated by three different strategic objectives. First, on internal policy, second, on alliance with Russia, and finally, preparation for a possible deal with the Trump administration. To start with, Kim Yo-jong's comments were intended to show the domestic audience that the Kim regime strongly maintains the unchangeable policy of a fully functional nuclear power in the world. This nuclear-armed posture does not stop here as a simple reference. Its clear stance hints a signal that North Korea is expected to expand international politics beyond the Korean peninsula while taking advantage of its status as a nuclear-armed state, so that the North Korean population is able to support the Kim regime more than before, thanks to its enhanced status as a great nuclear power. Second, this discourse also targets Russia, which has recently become a new treaty ally of North Korea. This discourse is intended to press Russia to help North Korea become an official nuclear power by taking advantage of its status as one of the UN Security Council's permanent members. Russia could help North Korea be officially recognized as a nuclear-armed state directly by dismantling UN sanctions against North Korea, or indirectly by defending North Korea's position for its nuclear armament. So this discourse is intended to ask Russia for direct or indirect roles for its status as a nuclear power. Finally, this discourse is aimed at fully preparing for a possible bilateral deal between Kim Jong-un and Trump. By stressing its status as unchangeable status as a nuclear power, North Korea is aimed at stepping up its leverage over the United States so that it will be able to maximize its profits through a possible bilateral deal. Likewise, North Korea wants to sit at the negotiation table with the United States for a nuclear arms talk, not a talk on the denuclearization of North Korea. With this insight in mind, this daydream discourse is expected to last for a while.
Right, and against that backdrop, Ruy, the fate of American soldiers stationed here in South Korea has been rendered uncertain as Mr. Trump demands South Korea shoulder a heavier burden of the related expenses. But U.S. military authorities, for their part, they've actually been very quick to point out that any change in the status quo of American soldiers stationed here in South Korea would be problematic, and I'm quoting that word. Could you elaborate on this stance for us?
Yes, pulling back U.S. troops from Korea could turn out more in a danger than savings, no, in terms of money. First of all, just to remind everyone, in Korea there's more than 28,000 soldiers, U.S. soldiers stationed here, and usually there is an agreement to share the cost to to provide all the related expenses of the maintenance of these forces. This is called the Special Measures Agreement. Last year, this agreement was signed for the following 5 years with some gradual increases, but nothing major. Then, now that Trump has claimed that South Korea, he will force or he will try South Korea to increase its part of this cost sharing, the commander of the USFK, of the U.S. forces in Korea, Xavier Bronson, say exactly as you mentioned, that to reduce the forces would be problematic. And he pointed out 3 things in particular. They say these U.S. forces act as a deterrent not only to North Korea, but also to Russia and China. And he elaborated a little bit more, and you could say, notice this in many of the defense briefings, that there's a major concern, especially on the military ties between Russia and North Korea, that has been getting stronger lately. Secondly, he said that the U.S. forces play a key role in ballistic missile defense across the Indo-Pacific and are vital for the U.S. military to see, sense, and understand threats in the region. So, expanding a little bit on that, he did elaborate a little bit more on all these ties and all these measures that North Korea and Russia has taken together. For example, North Korea has sent troops to Russia to support their war with Ukraine. And in exchange, Moscow has provided technology for nuclear developments. So basically, this concern is based on, if you reduce the forces, in this context, it could be very dangerous. And considering what Trump said during the campaign, that if it was for him, South Korea should be paying 10 times more, around 10 times more of what they agreed last year. Well, this is a very concerning landscape.
Right, 10 times more, meaning $10 billion US a year for that. Professor Ban, the Trump administration is seeking to tie its tariff policy and defense cost sharing with South Korea into one negotiation package. How do you respond to this reality?
Well, although the Trump administration has paid tremendous attention to the economic front line through a trade war, this front line is expected to be shifted to a security front line all at once. In particular, in a transitional moment, when an economic front line will be converted into a security front line, the Trump administration is most likely to lay out one negotiation package aggressively. So, items for deal-making need to be identified in more detail before this transitional moment comes to the stage. Economic items could be shipbuilding cooperation between South Korea and the United States, on investment for the Alaska LNG project and making trade balance. Security items might include defense cost sharing, strategic flexibility on USFK's roles beyond the Korean Peninsula, cost for the deployment of strategic assets on the Korean Peninsula, and asking money for the nuclear consultative group. By figuring out those items, South Korea needs to develop specific deal-making scenarios for what to exchange with the United States. Moreover, South Korea should not expect that this deal-making will be finished simply in one step. This deal-making would be an ongoing process without an end. So the more items you develop, the better you make a deal from a long-term perspective. In short, South Korea should prepare for not only a deal of one negotiation package, but also a series of deal-making during an entire Trump administration.
Right, and speaking about deals, Ruy, there have been reports about South Korea and the US having signed a new war plan deal under the Biden administration, that happening last year to better address North Korea's nuclear advancements. Could you tell us a bit more about that particular deal?
Yes, this was revealed recently. The new plan is called O-Plan 5022, which is going to substitute the outdated Plan 5015. But going to the details, this is mainly to reinforce interoperability, deterrence, and long-term regional security. Of course, the main concern is Pyongyang, but they are thinking more in a regional type of sense. What happened is that under the previous plan, they did not integrate nuclear, biological, and chemical threats, including also hypersonic weapons and submarine-launched ballistic missiles. So in this plan, of course, they're going to integrate that part. So in general, this is what they're doing is they're updating because Pyongyang has developed and improved their arsenal and defense technologies, so they need to keep up with that. This is not something that was made from one day to the other. This is the result of many years of work and many exercises done, like the Freedom Shield exercise or the Ulchi Freedom Shield. And what the Xavier Bronson said, General Xavier Bronson said, is that the new plan enhances readiness before conflict, and they're shaping exercises and investment to match these evolving threats.
I see. And Ruy, amid the partnership among South Korea, Japan and the US to better deal with North Korea's nuclear ambitions, there is speculation about a trilateral meeting among the leaders of Russia, China and North Korea in Moscow next month. That is to celebrate Russia's Victory Day. What are the prospects of such a meeting?
Well, a joint appearance by these three leaders in the Red Square would mean like an unprecedented diplomatic earthquake, right? But to be honest, it seems unlikely still to this date. And there is still some hope because recently Russia said that they were preparing for a visit of Kim Jong-un. Nevertheless, Kim Jong-un doesn't really attend multilateral meetings. He prefers bilateral summits so he can have more protagonism. Also, there's other factors like Kim Jong-un has never fly to Moscow, for example. He has visited other parts of Russia. And the fact that Xi Jinping hasn't really shown support to nuclear provocations or these new military ties between Russia and Pyongyang. So he might prefer to avoid that trilateral meeting, right? Still, some experts believe that, well, first of all, they are both invited. Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un are invited to this event, which is going to mark the 80th anniversary of Victory Day on May 9. But what they say is that if Russia manages to put them all together, it will be a way to show that they have a strength against the Western allies that are against their invasion to Ukraine. So it could be a good opportunity for that, but still taking into account China's calculus, the optimist risk that Kim Jong-un doesn't like to be in these multilateral meetings, it seems still unlikely. But in terms of Xi Jinping, it all points out from the latest statements from their foreign minister that he will be there.
Right. Professor Ban, Ruy just mentioned Ukraine. Now, amid efforts to ensure a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, some pundits have been questioning the impact of such a deal on Russia's ties with North Korea. What do you foresee happening to Moscow's ties with Pyongyang post-war in Ukraine?
Well, I would say that how to make such a deal rather than simply a ceasefire itself actually matters more regarding its impacts on ties between North Korea and Russia. Three scenarios could be possible. The first scenario is that such a deal turns out that Russia wins the war with Ukraine by annexing 1/5 of Ukraine's territory. Under this scenario, North Korea might be treated as a co-winner of the war by Russia. So Russia will be more than willing to provide strategic assets and technologies that North Korea wants, leading to more consolidated ties between the two countries. But at the same time, those ties might not guarantee a long-term relationship because North Korea is less valuable as a military partner in a situation where the war ends. The second scenario is that some NATO forces or EU troops are dispatched to Ukraine as peacekeeping forces, despite Russia's annexation of some Ukrainian territory. Such a deal might not be defined as a strategic success by Russia because those forces will prevent Russia from making another offensive on the Eurasian battlefield. Under this scenario, Russia is most likely to still recognize North Korea as a valuable ally who can potentially help it through a dispatch of military troops in the case of contingency. So under this scenario, Russia's ties with North Korea are expected to be not only consolidated, but also persistent for a while. The third scenario is that a deal-making leads the United States to have strategic and economic ties with Russia. Once United States ties with Russia are made indeed, Russia might be estranged from North Korea as well as China, particularly because Moscow needs less help from Pyongyang. Under this scenario, Russia's ties with North Korea remain the weakest. All in all, since numerous scenarios would be made depending on geopolitical situations and strategic calculations, it is too early to tell a trajectory of such a deal on ties between the two countries. How to make an impact on their ties is hard to guess, particularly in a situation where Trump uses uncertainty as his asset for maximizing leverage. Meanwhile, several scenarios, as I mentioned, might be taken into consideration for developing countermeasures.
Right, and speaking about ties, Ruy, one final question to you. South Korea recently established diplomatic ties with longtime North Korean ally Syria. What's the significance of that particular event?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, Syria used to be a very strong ally of North Korea, just as Cuba. And now both countries have signed diplomatic ties with South Korea. So the relevance of this is that South Korea is managing to, let's say, to give a symbolic jab to Pyongyang in the sense that maybe right now the relationship between North Korea and South Korea is in one of its lowest ebbs, but a way to strengthen South Korea's position is by making these deals or strengthening diplomatic ties with the countries that used to be friends or allies of Pyongyang. With this move, Seoul now has diplomatic ties with all the members of the UN, except, of course, North Korea. And the fact that this transitional government of Syria signed this deal or agreed to these diplomatic ties is not a coincidence. Also, Seoul, from their side, they will provide aid to reconstruct Syria, many of the parts that were destroyed, of course, by conflict and other matters.
Right, for, of course, greater cooperation going forward, of course. All right, Ruy, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Professor Ban, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thanks for having me.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. We return same time tomorrow with a look at the impact of U.S. tariffs on South Korea and more. Do join us then.